Hey there, and welcome back to the Family Fudge. If you're new here, I'm Jennifer, and in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 different sheet pan dinners. Sheet pan dinners are great because they come together so quickly, they make enough to feed my entire family, and they usually involve very little prep work. Now, these recipes I actually tested out on my family this week. I do have a few picky eaters, and I'd never made any of these recipes before. So as I'm going through them, I'm going to let you know whether my family actually like these recipes or not. I'll share with you any problems I had along the way, and I'll share with you what I plan to do differently to each recipe if I plan to make them in the future. I hope this video gives you some dinner time inspiration. If you enjoy it, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you're new. And now without further ado, let's get started. So the first dinner I made was a gigantic sheet pan chicken quesadilla. This recipe I actually saw the Pioneer woman make last week and it looked so interesting. I couldn't wait to give it a try. Now if you guys can't already tell, I am a huge fan of the Pioneer woman, and in fact 2 years ago to the day I was actually able to take a tour of the ranch where she films her cooking show, and let me just say I was completely starstruck and it was so awesome. I loved it. You guys have to let me know in the comments down below if you are a Pioneer Woman fan as well. So for this recipe, I started by preheating my oven at 450 degrees. This is gonna cook really fast. Then, just to make sure that these tortillas didn't stick, I went ahead and brushed the entire bottom of the sheet pan with a little bit of melted butter. And of course, this butter also helps to kind of crisp up the tortilla and make it super delicious. And speaking of the tortillas, for this recipe, I used a total of 8 burrito-sized tortillas, and the burritos are like the 10-inch size, so they're pretty big. And you guys, as I added them to my baking sheet, I arranged each one so it was hanging over the edge just like this. So I added 6 tortillas all the way around the edge, and for tortilla number 7, I put that right in the center. So the next thing I did was add lots of cheese. Now you can add any kind of cheese you want for this recipe. The Pioneer woman suggests using cheddar, but whenever I'm making a quesadilla, I like to use the quesadilla cheese. Now I just get this at Walmart. This is actually a mixture of a couple of different kinds of cheeses, and the best part is that it melts really well. It's definitely what you want if you're making a quesadilla. I also added just a little bit of shredded cheddar in here as well. I didn't have very much of this left, but this was the perfect way to go ahead and use up the rest of this bag. Now after that, it was time for the chicken. Now I think this is the perfect way to use up any leftover chicken that you might have, or you could go ahead and use a rotisserie chicken, which is actually what I'm using. I just shredded it up and I'm trying to add it all over so that every single bite gets some chicken. Now to season up this chicken, I also added 1 teaspoon of taco seasoning, and then at this point you really could add whatever else you want in here. I went ahead and added some diced green chilies. Now I used the mild ones because I didn't want this to be too spicy for my kids. Next I added about a cup of corn. Now if you are using frozen corn, definitely go ahead and defrost that first, otherwise it might make your quesadilla soggy. After the corn, I also added some sliced black olives. I just sprinkled those all over. I followed that with a little bit of mild salsa, and I just plopped little spoonfuls all over like this. Here is the important part. You want to go ahead and use the rest of your cheese right on top. Definitely need that extra layer to kind of help seal this together as it's melting. Now here is the fun part. To close this up, all you have to do is fold each tortilla over just like this to kind of close the whole thing up. And as you can see, tortilla number 8 goes right in the center. Now before I stuck this in the oven, I took the rest of the melted butter and I just spread it all over the top of the tortillas. Again, this helps it to get nice and crispy and golden brown, and you definitely could stick this in the oven just as is, but if you have a second pan, you can go ahead and put that on top, and that's going to help push it down and kind of seal it all together while it's in the oven. This takes about 20 to 25 minutes in the oven. When it's done, it should be nice and golden brown and the cheese should be melted. I serve this with a little bit of salsa and sour cream, but if you have some hot sauce or some avocado, that would be delicious too. Out of all 6 people in my family, I only had one that did not like this recipe, and the part that she didn't like was the chicken. So next time I make this, instead of using chicken, I might use some ground beef instead, and I might throw in some black beans as well. That would be so good. For the next dinner, I made a sheet pan stuffed crust pizza. Now, my kids absolutely love all different kinds of pizza, but I do have to say that getting takeout stuffed crust pizza can be a little bit pricey. I did the math on this homemade version, and you can definitely save a lot of money by making this yourself. For this recipe, start by preheating your oven at 425. Then the next thing you're going to want to do is spray your pan really well. You can use oil or butter, whatever you have. You just do not want your pizza crust to stick. For this recipe, I'm going to be using 2 of the Pillsbury thin crust pizza dough. So you guys, this makes a lot of pizza. This can feed a lot of people. And in case you're wondering, the sheet pan that I'm using is an 18 by 13 inch, and I got mine at Walmart. So with this pizza dough, I just popped it open, I unrolled it, and I placed it on half of my baking sheet, and I made sure that the dough was hanging off the edge about an inch or so on all of the sides. Then I put my second dough on the other half of my sheet pan, and then to connect the 2 pieces of dough, I just pressed them together. Now for the stuffed crust portion of this pizza, I'm actually going to be using about 10 or so sticks of string cheese. I just went ahead and unwrapped every single one, and I just placed these all the way around the edges of the pizza dough. Now to close this up, I started by folding over each of the corners, and I felt like there was a lot of extra dough here, so I did end up removing some of the extra as I was folding it over on the edges, and then along the sides, all I had to do was bring the dough up and around over the cheese and press it down to seal it. I think this is the perfect recipe to let your kids actually help you make because it is super easy. So once I had all of my crust stuffed with cheese, it was time to add lots of flavor to the crust itself. So for this, I just took a little bit of melted butter, and to this I added plenty of garlic powder and some Italian seasoning. So now at this point, you can go ahead and make this pizza however you like it. If it was up to me, I would probably put mushrooms and peppers and onions and jalapenos. That's what I like. But since I was making this with kids in mind, I ended up just doing some pizza sauce. I spread that all out nice and thin, and then I added several handfuls of cheese. And instead of just using plain mozzarella, I decided to go with some Italian blend of cheeses. Once I had that all spread out, I added on some turkey pepperoni, finished it off with a little sprinkling of cheese, then I popped it into the oven for about 15 minutes. And check it out, you guys, this looked so good. It smelled delicious. It was definitely ooey and gooey with all of that cheese. This was definitely a dinner enjoyed by all. Everybody loved it. But I do have to say, if I would make this again, I would definitely cook it a little bit longer. My kids usually prefer a crispier crust, and this was a little bit on the softer side. So yeah, next time I would just cook it a little bit longer. Next up, I made one of our favorites, which is breakfast for dinner. Now, I had seen the idea for sheet pan pancakes all over the internet, but I'd never actually made it before, so I wasn't quite sure how it would turn out. For this recipe, I preheated my oven at 425, and then just to make sure that this pancake didn't stick, I also added some parchment paper to the bottom of my sheet pan, and I really love these pre-cut sheets. I get these at Target. I just think that these are so much easier to use than the roll of parchment paper. So after I put the parchment paper down, I also sprayed a little bit of non-stick spray right on top, and then I went ahead and set that aside. in a separate bowl, I went ahead and prepared my pancake mix. Now, if you make this at home, you can use any pancake mix that you prefer. So whether it's a protein pancake mix, a just add water pancake mix, or maybe even a pancake mix with sprinkles, any of those will work just fine. But for this recipe, I decided to go with the classic Bisquick version. Now, usually on the back of the box of Bisquick, you'll find the recipe for pancakes, but you'll also find the recipe for the deluxe version. The deluxe version takes a few more ingredients, but I think they are definitely fluffier and they taste better, so that's what I like to make. You make this, just prepare any kind of pancake mix that you like, mix it all up, and then just dump it directly onto your pan. Once you have it on your pan, you're just going to spread it all out, and then comes the fun part. You really could just bake this as is and you would have regular plain pancakes. I decided to add 4 different kinds of toppings to these pancakes. So in the first quadrant, I added some sliced strawberries. These were fresh strawberries that I cut into heart shape. In the next quadrant, I added plenty of fresh blueberries. Blueberries are a classic topping for pancakes. In the next section, I added some chocolate chips, and in the last section, I added some slices of banana. Now, I would love to know in the comments down below, what do you like to add to your pancakes? Are you more of a chocolate chip person or a banana person, or do you prefer them just plain? I popped these into the oven, and the recipe that I was looking at suggested cooking them anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes, which is a pretty big window of time. So I definitely kept my eye on these, and when I thought they were done, I pulled them out of the oven and they looked just like this. So not super brown, just a light golden color. But what I quickly found out was the sections with the chocolate chips and the blueberries were completely cooked through, but the parts with the fresh fruit were not cooked all the way through. I really think that the moisture from the bananas and the moisture from the strawberries made those sections not cooked all the way, while the other 2 sections were completely done. So while everybody in my family actually liked how this tasted, the next time I make it, I probably won't mix chocolate and fruit in the same pan. I'll probably just do all fruit or all chocolate chips, and then I think the cooking time will be a lot more even. I have a confession to make. While I was plating up some of these chocolate chip pancakes, I thought it would be really fun to dust them with some powdered sugar, only to find out that when I reached into my pantry to grab powdered sugar, I accidentally grabbed cornstarch instead. So yeah, I totally topped these with cornstarch, and that was not tasty. So yeah, don't be like me. Make sure you're using powdered sugar and not cornstarch. Now that brings me to a dinner that is really simple but really tasty: CheeseSteak sandwiches. For this recipe, you're actually supposed to use your broiler so that the meat cooks really fast but doesn't get too tough. Oh yes, and for easier cleanup, definitely line your baking sheet with some aluminum foil. I forgot to do that with this recipe, and I totally wish I had remembered. Kind of a messy recipe. To a separate bowl, I added 1 whole onion slice. I also added 1 green bell pepper slice, and then I added an entire carton of mushrooms. These came pre-sliced, so I didn't have to cut those. To these veggies, I added a little drizzle of olive oil, and then I sprinkled them with some Montreal steak seasoning. Now, if you don't have any of this, you definitely could go ahead and just add a little bit of salt, some pepper, and then usually Montreal steak seasoning also has garlic powder, onion powder, and paprika. Now, I just mixed those all together, and you guys, of course, if you don't like mushrooms, you can totally leave those out. And if you want to swap out the green bell pepper for a red or a yellow, you can totally do that too. Now at this point, I just dumped all of these veggies directly onto my sheet pan, and I spread them out all over, but I did leave a little section in the center for the meat. This recipe calls for about 1 1/3 pound of flank steak. Just add the entire thing right in the center, surrounded by all the onions and the peppers. And then to the meat itself, I also added a little drizzle of olive oil, and then I sprinkled the top with a little bit more of that Montreal steak seasoning. I just rubbed that all over the meat, and I popped it into my oven for about 10 to 12 minutes. About halfway through the cooking process, I did go ahead and remove it. I mixed all the veggies around, and I popped it back into the oven to complete the cooking process. To turn this into Philly cheesesteak style sandwiches, you are going to want to go ahead and slice up your meat. I like to cut this against the grain. Once I had it all sliced up, I added it back onto my pan. I mixed everything together. Then I actually covered the entire thing with slices of provolone cheese and put it back in the oven for about 5 minutes or so, or until all the cheese was melted. While the cheese is melting, you can go ahead and toast up whatever you want to serve this on. Overall, I thought this recipe was pretty tasty. I thought it was a tad bit salty for my liking, but I have to say some of my little kids didn't really like the peppers, so they ended up picking those out. Next up, I made sausage with pierogies and cabbage. For this recipe, once you have your oven preheating at 400 degrees, you're gonna start by adding your thinly shredded cabbage directly to the pan. I took a big shortcut here by using some coleslaw mix. That way I wouldn't have to actually shred up this cabbage by myself. It was already washed and ready to go. So once I had that all spread out, I went ahead and drizzled it with a little bit of olive oil. Then I also seasoned it with some salt, some pepper, and some garlic. And you guys, if you are not a fan of cabbage, you can really add any kind of veggie in here that you like. You can use Brussels sprouts, asparagus, or if you don't like veggies at all, you can leave all of them out. Next, to my pan, I added some slices of red bell pepper and some slices of yellow bell pepper. Next, it was time to add some sausage. This is actually a turkey kielbasa. This isn't spicy at all, and unlike the peppers, this is something I know that all of my kids will enjoy. Once I had those all sliced up, I added them onto my pan, and I made sure to leave plenty of space for my pierogi. I did not want these pierogi to stick, so I made sure to spray the pan with some non-stick spray before I laid these down onto the pan. Now the great thing about this recipe is that the meat is already fully cooked, which makes this really fast. It only takes about 15 minutes, and I did go ahead and take it out halfway so that I could give the vegetables a stir and so that I could turn the pierogies to the other side. Once I have this all plated up, I like to add a dollop of sour cream, maybe some parsley on top, and then we're ready to dig in. So this is a recipe I would definitely make again. The kids love the kielbasa, they love the pierogi, but I have to warn you guys, if you make this, definitely add more non-stick spray to your pan than I did, because as you can see, I had a lot of trouble with the pierogi. Even though I sprayed my pan, they still stuck really bad, but thankfully we were still able to enjoy them. Now last but not least, I have a very simple but delicious meat and potato recipe. With this recipe, I'm actually going to start by mixing up the glaze for the pork chops first, and this is just a really simple combination of honey, Worcestershire sauce, and about half of a ranch packet. Lastly in here, I'm just adding 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and then I'm going to whisk this all together. To my baking pan that I've already sprayed with some non-stick spray, go ahead and add on my boneless pork chops. Now I'm going to take that glaze and I'm going to get it all over both sides of the pork chops, and this is just going to give them so much good flavor. It's a little bit sweet, a little bit tangy. There's lots of good herbs in here. It is a delicious combination. So now that the pork chops are done, I can move on to the potatoes. This is just 1 pound of baby potatoes. This is actually a mixture of red and yellow. Because I want to make sure that these cook evenly, I'm gonna take some of these really big potatoes and I'm gonna go ahead and cut them in half so that all of the pieces are about the same size. To these potatoes, I'm going to add a simple drizzle of olive oil. Then I'm going to dump on the rest of the ranch packet. If you guys have ever tried ranch powder on top of potatoes, you'll know it's actually a really delicious combination. I'm going to finish this off with a little bit more salt, and I'm going to toss all of these potatoes around in the mixture. Now that those are coated, I can go ahead and dump them on the sheet pan as well. And I am going to leave just a little bit of space on the side for the green beans. Now you guys, because green beans cook a lot faster than the pork and the potatoes, I'm actually going to put this in the oven for about 15 minutes before I take it back out and then add in the green beans. While I added the green beans, I also flipped over each piece of pork, and I also stirred around the potatoes just a little bit to make sure that all of the edges were browning. Once you've added the green beans, you just have to pop all of it back into the oven for about 5 to 10 more minutes, or until the green beans are soft and the pork is cooked through. Now you guys, I thought this recipe turned out pretty good, but not all of my kids enjoyed it. They weren't really big fans of the green beans, but they did enjoy the potatoes. So next time I make this, I'll probably cook twice the amount of potatoes. Now I hope this video gave you some dinner inspiration and that you might find one or two of these recipes that you can make yourself. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new, and I'll see you in my next video.